Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than most people expected. At 5'4" with a lean build, she often found herself underestimated in rooms full of much larger individuals. Today was no different, as she walked through the doors of Fort Braxton Military Base, carrying her duffel bag and wearing civilian clothes that made her look more like a college student than someone with 2 decades of elite military experience. The afternoon sun beat down on the North Carolina base as Sarah made her way to the temporary housing facility. She had been assigned to conduct a 3-week training program for new recruits, sharing her expertise in advanced combat techniques and survival skills. What the soldiers at Fort Braxton didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had spent the last 20 years as one of the Navy's most decorated SEALs, participating in classified missions across 4 continents. Sarah had retired from active duty just 6 months earlier, but the military had called her back for this special assignment. Her reputation preceded her in certain circles, but she preferred to keep a low profile. The fewer people who knew about her background, the better she could observe and assess the trainees without preconceived notions affecting their behavior. As she approached the housing complex, Sarah noticed a group of soldiers gathered near the entrance. They were laughing loudly and appeared to be in high spirits, probably enjoying some downtime between training sessions. She recognized the type immediately. Young, confident, and full of the bravado that often came with military training but limited real-world experience. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely as she tried to pass the group. They were blocking the walkway, and she needed to get to the check-in desk inside the building. One of the soldiers, a tall man with broad shoulders and sergeant stripes on his sleeve, looked down at her with amusement. Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice carrying across the area. "Looks like someone's lost. The base tour for civilians ended an hour ago, sweetheart." Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had encountered this attitude countless times throughout her career, especially in the early days when female SEALs were even rarer than they were now. "I'm not lost," she replied calmly. "I'm checking in for temporary housing. If you could just move aside, I'd appreciate it." The sergeant's friends gathered closer, forming a semicircle around Sarah. She could sense their energy shifting from casual amusement to something more aggressive. It was a dynamic she understood well, pack mentality, with the leader showing off for his followers. "Temporary housing?" Another soldier chimed in. This one younger with corporal stripes. "What are you? Some kind of contractor? You look a little small to be working on a military base. Maybe you should try the gift shop instead." Sarah set her duffel bag down carefully, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. 20 years of training had taught her to read situations quickly, and she could see where this was heading. The soldiers were enjoying themselves, probably seeing her as easy entertainment for a boring afternoon. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to let me pass." The sergeant laughed, a sound that held no real humor. "Oh, you're going to ask us? That's cute. You know what, guys? I think our new friend here needs to learn about respect. Maybe we should teach her about the chain of command." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She began cataloging exits, noting the positions of each soldier, calculating distances and potential threats. But she also knew that sometimes the best strategy was to de-escalate before things got out of hand. "Look," she said, raising her hand slightly in a peaceful gesture, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to do my job here. Can we all be adults about this?" The sergeant's expression hardened. "Adults? You think you can come onto our base and tell us how to act?" "I don't think so, lady. Maybe you need to learn your place." He took a step closer to Sarah, using his height advantage to try to intimidate her. The other soldiers moved in as well, effectively trapping her in the middle of their circle. Sarah could smell the beer on their breath now, which explained part of their behavior, though it didn't excuse it. "Your place," the sergeant continued, "is wherever we say it is. And right now, I think your place is on your knees, apologizing for your attitude." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained calm. "That's not going to happen." The corporal laughed nervously. "Sarge, Maybe we should just let her go. She's probably somebody's wife or something. Shut up, Morrison, the sergeant snapped. I'm talking to the lady here. He turned back to Sarah. You know what? I think you need a reality check. Boys, why don't we show our guest here what happens when civilians don't show proper respect on a military installation? Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in dangerous situations. Her breathing slowed, her muscles relaxed, and her mind became crystal clear. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but these soldiers had made their choice. Last chance, she said quietly. Walk away now, and we can all pretend this never happened. The sergeant reached out to grab her shoulder. I don't think you understand the situation you're in, sweetheart. You're outnumbered. You're on our turf, and nobody's coming to help you. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. They were all young, probably between 19 and 25 years old. They had been through basic training, maybe some advanced courses, but she could tell from their body language and positioning that they had never faced a real threat. They were playing soldier, not being soldiers. You're right about one thing, Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge. I am outnumbered, 4 against 1. Those aren't very fair odds. The soldiers laughed, thinking she was admitting defeat. The sergeant smiled widely. Now you're starting to get it. So why don't you just... For you, Sarah finished, cutting him off. The laughter stopped abruptly. The sergeant's face darkened with anger. What did you just say? Sarah picked up her duffel bag with one hand, keeping her other hand free. I said those aren't fair odds for you. 4 untrained kids against someone who's been doing this since before you were old enough to tie your own shoes. The corporal shifted nervously. Sarge, maybe we should just... Grab her, the sergeant ordered. I've had enough of this attitude. 2 of the soldiers moved toward Sarah while the sergeant and corporal blocked her potential escape routes. It was a tactical error that someone with proper training would never have made. By spreading themselves out, they had eliminated their numerical advantage and created multiple angles of attack for their opponent. Sarah dropped her duffel bag and waited. 20 years of the most intensive combat training in the world had prepared her for situations far more dangerous than this. 4 drunk soldiers on a sunny afternoon barely registered as a threat. But she knew she had to be careful. These were still American servicemen, and she didn't want to seriously injure them if she could avoid it. The first soldier reached for her arm. Sarah moved like lightning, grabbing his wrist and using his own momentum to send him stumbling past her into the second attacker. Both men went down in a tangle of arms and legs. Neither seriously hurt, but thoroughly confused about what had just happened. The sergeant's eyes widened in surprise, but his anger quickly overcame his shock. You think you're tough? He snarled. Let's see how tough you are in about 30 seconds. Sarah stood perfectly still, watching as the sergeant and corporal approached her from different angles. She could see they had been trained in basic hand-to-hand combat, but their technique was sloppy, and they were letting their emotions control their actions. This is your last warning, Sarah said. Stand down now, or I will put you down. The sergeant laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. Big words from a little girl. Morrison. When I grab her, you take her legs. Sarah almost felt sorry for them. They had no idea what they were dealing with, and their sergeant was about to lead them into a situation that would end very badly for all of them. But she had given them multiple chances to walk away, and they had chosen this path. The moment of truth was fast approaching, and Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next. After 20 years of facing the world's most dangerous enemies in the most challenging conditions imaginable, 4 overconfident soldiers at a training base didn't even qualify as a warm-up exercise. But what happened next would change everything for everyone involved, and word of this encounter would spread throughout the base faster than wildfire. The legend of the small woman who couldn't be intimidated was about to be born, though the full truth of who she really was would remain hidden for a little while longer. The sergeant lunged forward with surprising speed, but to Sarah Martinez, his movement seemed almost comically slow. 20 years of SEAL training had honed her reflexes to superhuman levels, and she had faced enemies far more skilled and dangerous than an overconfident army sergeant with too much beer in his system. Sarah sidestepped the sergeant's charge effortlessly, her movement so fluid it looked almost like dancing. As he stumbled past her, She delivered a precise strike to a pressure point behind his knee. The big man's leg buckled immediately, and he crashed to the ground with a grunt of pain and surprise. Morrison, the corporal, hesitated for just a moment as he watched his sergeant go down. That moment of doubt was all Sarah needed. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and applied a blood choke that put the young soldier to sleep in less than 3 seconds. She lowered him gently to the ground, making sure he wouldn't be injured when he fell. The 2 soldiers who had initially attacked her were scrambling to their feet, their faces now showing fear instead of arrogance. They had just watched a woman half their size take down their sergeant and corporal without breaking a sweat, and they were beginning to realize they were in way over their heads. "Johnson, call for backup," one of them shouted as he reached for his radio. Sarah moved across the ground like a shadow, reaching the soldier before he could complete his radio call. A quick strike to his wrist caused him to drop the device, and a follow-up technique left him sitting on the ground, dazed but unharmed. The last soldier standing raised his hands in surrender. Okay. We give up. Don't hurt us anymore." Sarah stepped back, not even breathing hard, despite having just neutralized 4 opponents in less than 30 seconds. "Smart choice," she said calmly. The sergeant was struggling to get back to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You're going to regret this," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Assaulting military personnel is a federal crime. You're going to prison for this." Sarah looked down at him with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children having tantrums. "First of all, you attacked me. I defended myself. Second, nobody was seriously hurt. And third, you might want to think very carefully about how you want to report this incident." "Are you threatening me?" the sergeant demanded, finally managing to stand up despite his injured knee. "I'm giving you advice," Sarah replied. "Think about how this is going to sound in your report. 4 trained soldiers couldn't subdue 1 unarmed woman. Your commanding officer is going to have some interesting questions about your fitness for duty." The sergeant's face went pale as the implications of her words sank in. Military careers had been ruined over less embarrassing incidents than this one. Morrison was starting to wake up, groggily trying to figure out what had happened to him. The other 2 soldiers were helping each other to their feet, both looking thoroughly shaken by the experience. "Who are you?" the sergeant asked, his voice now carrying a note of respect that had been completely absent before. Sarah bent down to pick up her duffel bag. "Someone who's been exactly where you are right now, except I had to earn my place instead of trying to take it by force." Before anyone could respond, a sharp voice cut through the afternoon air. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see a middle-aged man in officer's uniform approaching the group. His insignia identified him as Colonel Williams, the base commander. Sarah had been briefed about him before her arrival, a career military man with a reputation for running a tight ship. "Sir," the sergeant said, snapping to attention despite his obvious discomfort. There was a misunderstanding with this civilian, sir." Colonel Williams looked around the scene, taking in the disheveled appearance of the 4 soldiers and Sarah's calm demeanor. His experienced eye immediately recognized that something significant had just taken place. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't believe that explanation for a second. "Miss Martinez, I presume?" Sarah straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. I was told you'd arrived on base. I came to personally welcome you and escort you to your quarters." He looked pointedly at the 4 soldiers. "I see you've already met some of our personnel." The sergeant's confusion was obvious. "Sir, you know her?" Colonel Williams studied the sergeant for a long moment. "Sergeant Patterson, isn't it? Tell me, what exactly happened here?" Patterson glanced nervously at his companions, clearly trying to figure out how to explain the situation without making himself look incompetent. "Well, sir, this woman was acting suspiciously, and when we tried to question her, she became hostile and attacked us." Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She was curious to see how this would play out. "Hostile," the colonel repeated. And you felt it necessary to use 4 soldiers to subdue one unarmed woman? She's dangerous, sir, Morrison added, still rubbing his neck where Sarah had applied the chokehold. She knows some kind of martial arts or something. Colonel Williams turned to Sarah. Is that how you remember the incident, Miss Martinez? Sarah considered her words carefully. She could destroy these soldiers' careers with a truthful account of what had happened. But that wasn't her goal. The soldiers were enthusiastic about establishing their authority, she said diplomatically. I simply clarified the situation for them. The colonel's lips twitched slightly, suggesting he understood far more about what had really happened than he was letting on. I see. And now that the situation has been clarified, I trust there won't be any further misunderstandings? No, sir, Patterson said quickly. No further misunderstandings. Excellent. Sergeant Patterson, I want you and your men to report to Lieutenant Morrison, the other Lieutenant Morrison, not this corporal, for extra duty assignments. Apparently, you have too much free time on your hands. The sergeant's face fell. Extra duty meant additional work details, longer hours, and less free time. It was a punishment that would be noted in their service records. As for you, Miss Martinez, the colonel continued, please allow me to personally apologize for this incident. I can assure you it won't happen again. No apology necessary, sir, Sarah replied. Sometimes these things just happen. Colonel Williams gestured toward the housing complex. Shall we get you checked in? I imagine you're tired from your journey. As they walked away from the 4 soldiers, the colonel spoke quietly to Sarah. 20 years as a SEAL. 3 Purple Hearts, Navy Cross, and more classified commendations than most people see in a lifetime. Yet you let them off easy. Any particular reason? Sarah glanced back at the soldiers, who were still standing in shocked silence. They're young and stupid, not malicious. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. That's remarkably charitable, considering they were about to assault you. Were they? Sarah asked with a slight smile. I must have misread the situation. Colonel Williams chuckled. I have a feeling the next 3 weeks are going to be very interesting around here. As they entered the housing complex, neither of them noticed the small crowd of soldiers who had witnessed the entire incident from nearby buildings. Word was already beginning to spread throughout the base about the mysterious woman who had single-handedly taken down 4 soldiers without even working up a sweat. By dinner time, the story had grown to epic proportions. Some claimed she was a secret agent. Others insisted she was a professional fighter. A few of the more creative storytellers suggested she might be some kind of superhuman experiment. But none of them knew the truth. None of them realized that the quiet woman eating dinner alone in the corner of the mess hall was one of the most lethal and highly trained warriors in the world. And none of them suspected that their assumptions about gender, size, and capability were about to be challenged in ways they never could have imagined. The real test was still to come, and when it arrived, it would shake the foundations of everything these soldiers thought they knew about strength, skill, and what it meant to be a true warrior. 3 days had passed since the incident outside the housing complex, and the atmosphere at Fort Braxton had shifted dramatically. Word of the mysterious woman who had defeated 4 soldiers spread through the base like wildfire. With each retelling adding new embellishments to the story, some claimed she had used ancient ninja techniques. Others insisted she had military training from a foreign country. The truth, however, remained hidden. Sarah Martinez had spent those 3 days quietly observing the base operations and preparing for her training program. She had deliberately kept a low profile, eating meals during off hours and avoiding the common areas where soldiers gathered. But she couldn't escape the stares and whispered conversations that followed her wherever she went. On Thursday morning, she received a message to report to Colonel Williams' office at 0800 hours. When she arrived, she found the colonel reviewing a thick file folder that she immediately recognized as her service record. Miss Martinez, the colonel said, looking up from the papers, please, have a seat. We need to discuss your situation here on the base. Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, maintaining the relaxed but alert posture that had become second nature after decades in the military. Is there a problem, sir? Colonel Williams set the folder aside and leaned back in his chair. That depends on your perspective. The incident with Sergeant Patterson and his men has created quite a stir among the troops. Morale is complicated. Complicated how? Well, on one hand, Patterson and his crew have become the laughingstock of the base. 4 soldiers taken down by one woman, half their size. It's embarrassing for them, and, by extension, for the entire unit they represent. Sarah nodded. She had expected this conversation eventually. And on the other hand? On the other hand, you've become something of a legend. The soldiers are fascinated by you. They want to know who you are, where you came from, and how you learned to fight like that. Some of them are intimidated. Others see you as a challenge to overcome. The colonel paused, studying Sarah's reaction. When she remained silent, he continued, I've been thinking about how to handle this situation, and I believe the best course of action is complete transparency. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning I think it's time these soldiers learned exactly who they're dealing with. Your cover, such as it was, has been blown anyway. We might as well use this to our advantage. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Colonel Williams called for the visitor to enter, and Sergeant Patterson stepped into the room. His face was bruised, and he was walking with a slight limp from his injured knee. Sir, you wanted to see me? Patterson said, his voice carefully respectful. Yes, Sergeant. Please take a seat. The colonel gestured to a chair next to Sarah's. Patterson sat down reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable being in the same room with the woman who had humiliated him. Sergeant Patterson, the colonel began. I understand you've been having some difficulty with your men since Tuesday's incident. Patterson's jaw tightened. Sir, the men are. They're having trouble respecting my authority. They keep making jokes about what happened. And what exactly do they think happened? They think I got beat up by some random woman. It's affecting unit cohesion, sir. I need to restore my credibility somehow. Colonel Williams nodded thoughtfully. I see. And how do you propose to do that? Patterson glanced at Sarah. His eyes filled with resentment and wounded pride. I want a rematch. 1-on-1. No outside interference. I need to prove that what happened was just luck. Sarah almost smiled at the young man's persistence, but she kept her expression neutral. Sergeant, what happened wasn't luck, and a rematch won't change anything. We'll see about that. Patterson said defiantly. Unless you're afraid to face me, when you don't have the element of surprise. Colonel Williams held up a hand to prevent Sarah from responding. Sergeant, before you dig this hole any deeper, there's something you need to know about Miss Martinez. He opened the folder on his desk and pulled out a photograph. It showed Sarah in military dress uniform, her chest covered with medals and ribbons. Patterson's eyes widened as he took in the image. Meet Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, retired, the colonel said formally. 20 years of service with the United States Navy SEALs. 3 tours in Afghanistan. 2 in Iraq. 1 classified deployment that I can't discuss. Navy Cross recipient for extraordinary heroism under fire. Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device for valor. Patterson's face went pale as the colonel continued reading from the file. Instructor rating for advanced combat training, survival, evasion, resistance and escape, and close quarters combat. Expert marksman with 7 different weapon systems. Fluent in 4 languages. Certified in underwater demolition, high-altitude low-opening parachute operations, and urban warfare tactics. The sergeant looked from the photograph to Sarah and back again, his mouth hanging open in shock. The woman you attacked, Colonel Williams concluded, is one of the most highly trained and decorated warriors in the history of the United States military. She has skills that most soldiers can only dream of acquiring, and she's forgotten more about combat than you'll learn in your entire career. Sarah finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Sergeant Patterson, when I retired 6 months ago, I had spent 2 decades fighting enemies who wanted to kill me and everyone I served with. I've been shot, stabbed, blown up, and left for dead in places most people can't even pronounce. The reason I'm sitting here today is because I never underestimated my opponents, and I never let pride override good judgment. Patterson stared at her, his earlier defiance completely gone. I had no idea. Ma'am, I'm sorry. We all are. We thought you were just some civilian contractor or something. The mistake was understandable, Sarah said. I don't exactly look like what people expect when they think of a Navy SEAL. But that's kind of the point. The most dangerous enemies are often the ones you don't see coming. Colonel Williams leaned forward in his chair. Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant. Miss Martinez is here to conduct advanced training for our special operations candidates. You and your men are going to be her first students. Consider it an opportunity to learn from the best. Sir. Yes, sir, Patterson said, his voice now filled with respect rather than resentment. One more thing, the colonel added. Miss Martinez's identity and background are classified information. Anyone who discusses her service record outside of official channels will face court-martial. Is that understood? Understood, sir. After Patterson left the office, Colonel Williams turned back to Sarah. I hope you don't mind my decision to reveal your background. I felt it was necessary to prevent this situation from escalating further. Sarah shrugged. It was probably inevitable anyway. I'm just surprised it took this long for someone to figure it out. The men need to understand what real strength looks like, the colonel said. Too many of them think it's about size and intimidation. You'll show them that true strength comes from discipline, training, and mental toughness. What about the rematch Patterson wanted? Colonel Williams smiled. Oh, he'll get his rematch. But it'll be during official training hours, with proper supervision, and as a learning exercise, rather than a personal vendetta. He'll learn more from losing to you in a controlled environment than he ever would from getting lucky in a parking lot brawl. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah conducted the most intensive training program Fort Braxton had ever seen. The soldiers learned about real combat scenarios, proper tactical thinking, and the kind of mental preparation required for life or death situations. They discovered that everything they thought they knew about fighting was barely scratching the surface of what was possible. Sergeant Patterson became one of her most dedicated students. His earlier humiliation transformed into motivation to become better. He learned to channel his natural aggression into productive techniques, and more importantly, he learned to respect opponents, regardless of their appearance. The other soldiers on the base watched in awe as their colleagues emerged from each training session exhausted, enlightened, and fundamentally changed. Word spread that the mysterious woman wasn't just skilled, she was legendary. But the full extent of her background remained classified, known only to a select few. On her last day at Fort Braxton, Sarah was packing her gear when there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Sergeant Patterson and his 3 companions from the original incident, all standing at attention. Ma'am, Patterson said formally, we wanted to thank you for everything you've taught us. And we wanted to apologize again for our behavior when you arrived. Sarah smiled. You've all grown a lot in the past 3 weeks. I'm proud of the progress you've made. Ma'am, if it's okay to ask, Morrison said hesitantly, what was the hardest mission you ever completed? Sarah considered the question carefully. The hardest mission, she said finally, was learning to forgive myself for the mistakes I made early in my career. Combat skills can be taught, but wisdom has to be earned through experience, sometimes painful experience. As she drove away from Fort Braxton that afternoon, Sarah reflected on the past 3 weeks. She had come to the base as an instructor, but she had learned as much as she had taught. The young soldiers had reminded her of who she used to be, eager, confident, and completely unaware of how much she didn't know. But more importantly, she had proven something to herself. Her value as a warrior wasn't diminished by her retirement or her gender or her size. It was defined by her ability to pass on hard-earned knowledge to the next generation of defenders. The legend of the woman who couldn't be intimidated would live on at Fort Braxton long after she was gone, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah Martinez smiled at the thought that maybe, just maybe, the next time someone underestimated an opponent based on appearances alone, they would remember her story and think twice. The road ahead stretched out before her, leading to new challenges and new opportunities to serve. After 20 years as a Navy SEAL and 3 weeks as an instructor, Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing who you are and staying true to that knowledge, no matter what anyone else might think.